Hi guys, in today's video we're going to be making this adorable little guy. So let's get started. So for this project we're going to use the following things. We've got some core wool, some top wool, I'm using merino, and I'm using white, grey, dark grey, black and a peachy pink colour. I've got my felting mat, scissors and some felting needles. I will also add a link in the description to where I got the wool from. To start we're going to be using the core wool, so I'll just move the coloured wool to one side. And I'm just going to unravel and I'm going to grab a good chunk of the core wool. Then I'm going to very carefully roll this up, and I'm rolling it nice and tight. Then I'm going to start felting. I'm not felting it a lot, just felting it a little bit for now, just so that it holds its shape. And I'm actually going to add a little bit more wool. So I'm just going to pull some off and just add that straight over the top, like so. And again, I'm just going to felt that down so it stays together. So this is actually going to become the main body. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start shaping it. I want the top to be nice and rounded, and I want the bottom end to be nice and flat. So I'm going to start with the bottom end, and I'm just going to tuck in the sides of the wool, just fold them over like so. Then I'm going to keep felting around until this is nice and flat. The needle I'm using at the moment is a 38 triangular needle. I'm just going to keep felting. And as you can see, it's starting to flatten off at one side. So I'm going to flip him over and I'm going to round off the top. So to round it off, I'm just going to pinch the sides and very carefully start felting. And I'm going to rotate the work and again continue felting. But because we want it nice and rounded, we're going to keep rotating and keep felting until we get the shape that we're looking for. So now you can see that it's starting to take shape, nice and rounded at the top and flat at the bottom. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue felting to start to firm it up a little bit. I don't want it to be too firm, but I do want it to be firm enough so that it's going to start holding its shape really well. And if you feel like it's starting to get a bit too thin as you're felting, you can always add a bit more core wool where you feel necessary. So I'm going to keep felting while keeping the shape, just to firm it up a little bit more so it's ready for the next stage. I think I'm actually going to add a little bit more wool just to make it a little bit thicker. So just like before, I'm going to place the wool on and I'm going to roll it up. Just take it off the end a little bit because I don't want it to be too thick. Then I'm going to continue felting in the same way, keeping it rounded at the top and flat at the bottom. At this point you can start to speed things up by using a tool that holds 2 or more needles. I like to use just 2, and it just helps speed up the process. So after all that felting, the piece is now a lot more sturdy, but it's still soft enough that I can make adjustments to the shape if needed. So for the next step, we're going to be figuring out where we're going to place the face, and I like to do this by dividing my piece into thirds. So I'm just going to use my fingers to roughly figure out where the thirds are going to go, and we're going to be placing the face in the top section. So I'm just going to use my needle to mark out a line of where that top section is. This doesn't need to be too deep, but just make sure it's deep enough that you can see where the line placement is. I'm just going to zoom the camera in, so hopefully you can see a little bit better. I'm actually going to go over the line again with a larger needle. This is a 36 gauge, just so that hopefully you can see it a little bit better than what you could before. So now what we're going to do is, following on from the line we've just made, we're going to start marking out a little circle. Doesn't need to be perfect, but this is where our face is going to sit. Again, it doesn't need to be too deep, just enough so that you can see where it's going to go. I know it's not showing as well on camera, but in person I can actually see where the markings are, and you should also be able to see on your project where the markings are. So now we're going to be adding 2 tiny pieces of wool to make 2 little triangles on the side of the face. So I'm going to take some really tiny pieces of core wool. I'm just going to roll it up into a little sausage, like so. Then I'm going to place one end at the bottom of the face, and then the other end is going to get folded up like so and felted on. These don't need to be huge, just make them nice and small because they will get bigger when we add on the coloured wool. This is just to give a little bit more shape to the face. So felting down the bottom, felting the top, then I'm going to keep shaping this to form that little triangular shape. And I'm going to repeat the same steps for the other side, just using a really small amount, rolling it into a little sausage, and again placing it on the bottom and folding it at the top, and just forming that little triangle. And the next step, once we've added the triangles, we're going to be adding the muzzle. So again, I'm going to take a small amount of core wool and just roll it up, and we're going to be placing this just above the line that we used to mark out the thirds. So placing it just above that line, and I'm going to start felting it down and felting it at the top, and then I'm going to round it off at each side. So now I'm going to start shaping the muzzle, and I'm going to start by making a line straight down the centre, and then I'm going to flatten it off a little bit at the top, and that gives us our basic shape ready for adding the top colour. We will add some more detail to create the nose and create the shape of the mouth when we add the top colours. So next I'm going to take a large needle, this is the 36 gauge again, and I'm just going to make some indentations where I want the eyes to go. Just do one at either side. Then once you're happy with the placement, we can start making the eyes. To make the eyes, I'm just going to take some of the black wool. I'm just going to take a small amount and roll it into a ball. Then I'm going to place it into one of the indentations and I'm going to start felting it down. I'm using a smaller needle for this. This is the 40 gauge needle. This is a 40 triangle. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to shape it after. I'm going to repeat the same for the other side. Again, just taking a small amount of black wool, placing it into the indentation and felting down. I'm now just going to use a 42 gauge needle and just very lightly felt over just to firm them up a little bit. If you don't want to use wool for the eyes, then you can use beads or some plastic eyes or glass eyes, whichever you prefer. I just like to do them with wool. So once you're happy with the positioning of the eyes, then we can move on to shaping them. And to start shaping, we're going to be using the dark grey wool. I'm going to take a small amount of the dark grey. I only need a very small piece. Then I'm going to roll it up into a sausage shape. And this is going to become the eyelid. So what I'm going to do is place one end towards the bottom of the eye and just felt that down. Then I'm going to curve it around towards the other side of the eye, and then from here I'm going to follow the eye line and then just begin to shape how I want the eye to be. So at this point you can make the eyes bigger, make them appear smaller. Just keep felting and keep adjusting until you're happy with how it looks. Then once you're happy with the top eyelid, we're going to use the same dark grey and make a bottom one. So again, just taking a really small amount and rolling it into a little sausage and placing it along the bottom of the eye and shaping. Then once you're happy with it, repeat the same again for the other eye. It's a little bit hard to see on camera, but I'm just going to try and show what it looks like. But hopefully you should be able to see yours a lot better in person. So next we're going to be adding some white to the eyes, just to give it a little bit more definition and help with the shaping. So taking a very small piece of white wool, I'm going to roll it up into a little sausage, This is a very, very small piece, we don't need a lot at all. And I'm going to place it just above the bottom eyelid, so almost as if it's sitting in the eyelid. And I'm going to use my 40 gauge needle and start to felt that down. I'm going to curve it around the bottom lid. And I'm going to switch to the 42 needle just to really firm it up. Then I'm going to repeat the same again on the other eye. So once both eyes have got the white underneath, we're going to take a very, very tiny amount of white wool and we're just going to add some highlights to the eyes. So I'm going to place this one towards the top of the eye. And I'm using the 42 gauge needle to felt it in. I'm going to do the same again on the other eye. And it just helps to add that extra bit of detail. I'm now going to go back to using the dark grey wool. I'm just going to pull off a small amount and just felt it onto the mat, just so I get a nice little sheet of wool. Going to very carefully pull away some of the excess fibres, and then this piece is going to get placed at the sides of the eye to start creating the markings for the raccoon. So I'm going to place it at the side of the eye and it's going to come all the way to the section that we marked out earlier for the face shape. Don't worry if the piece of wool's a little big. You can always pull some more off and adjust as needed. So I'm just going to felt this down, coming from the eye out to the side of the face. And of course, once you're happy with it, repeat the same again for the other eye. Next, we're going to be adding some white. I'm going to start with the muzzle and then do the bottom of the face. And just like before, I'm going to take small pieces of wool and I'm going to fluff up the fibres and make another little sheet. Very carefully lift it from the mat and just pull away some of the excess. Then I'm going to place this directly over the muzzle and start felting down, and I'm going to use the 40 and the 42 gauge needle. And as I'm felting, I'm going to make sure to pay attention to the line that we created in the centre of the muzzle. I really want this to stand out, so I'm going to keep felting over it as I'm felting the rest of the piece. As the white wool begins to compress, I'm going to start marking out a smile line. So again, really refining that line down the centre. Then I'm going to extend it around and up towards the eyes, just marking out where the smile is going to go. I'm now going to add some white at either side of the bottom of the face, again using the outline we made earlier as a guide. So once that's felted down, next we're going to add a little mouth. So again, I'm going to take a very tiny piece of white wool and I'm just going to roll a very little sausage, just like so. Then I'm going to place it just underneath the muzzle and I'm going to felt down one end, curve it around and felt the other. Then I'm going to follow this natural bend here underneath the mouth and I'm just going to felt that down, switch to a smaller needle and now it's really starting to take shape. So I'm not going to add any more detail to that just yet. What I'm going to do is add some colour to the top of the face and I'm going to be using the lighter grey colour. So again, just using the same techniques, I'm going to fluff up the fibres and make a little sheet of wool. Just pulling off the excess and then I'm going to place this over the top of the face. And just like we did with the bottom, we're going to use the outline we made earlier as our guide. Now we're going to switch back to the white wool and we're going to add a white stripe above each eye. So I'm just going to take some and roll it into a little sausage. Just a very little piece, it doesn't need to be too thick. And we're just going to place that above the eye and felt it down. and do the same for the other side. And now I'm going to take some of the same grey that we used at the top of the head, just a really small piece, and I'm going to felt it over the top of the nose. And I'm just going to add a very tiny bit of the dark grey wool, and I'm just going to felt a line from the back of the nose up into the middle of the head. Just a very tiny bit to add a bit of extra detail. Starting to look a lot more like a raccoon now. So next we're going to be adding the nose. I'm just going to take some black wool and sort of roll it into a little ball. Then I'm going to place one end down and felt. Then I'm going to fold it over and felt at the top. I'm using the 42 gauge needle for this. And just keep shaping until you're happy. I'm going to add a little bit more wool to mine because I want it to be a little bit bigger. It's now time to add some detail into the mouth. So this is where the light pink wool is going to come in. I'm just going to take very tiny amounts of this. Then I'm going to place it just underneath the nose and very carefully felt it down. I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm just going to build it up very slowly. I'm also going to add a tiny bit of pink to the bottom jaw. And now to really define the mouth, I'm going to add a very thin black outline using the black wool. I'm going to be very careful and pull off some very thin strips, almost as thin as thread. And I'm going to roll it nice and tight. Then I'm going to place this over and just felt along to really define the mouth. And with the mouth all defined, that is the face now complete, and we're ready to move on to the next step. Now we're going to be adding the white wool. We're going to be adding it all around the body, all over the back of the head and around the face. So again, I'm using merino wool. I'm just going to very carefully pull it apart and fluff up the fibres. I want them to be going in all different directions. It doesn't have to be neat. This is just going to help them felt a little bit better. Then I'm going to felt it onto the mat. And create a sheet. So now when I lift this up, I'm going to flip it over and then I'm going to place it directly onto the raccoon, like so, and I'm going to start felting it down. I'm going to repeat this method until the entire raccoon is covered with the white wool. And here's what he's looking like so far. So next what I want to do is I'm going to be adding some, I'm not sure if ruffles is the right word, but I want to make it look nice and flowy at the bottom. So I'm just going to take a piece of wool and I'm just going to measure around just to see how long I need it to be. Then I'm just going to pull off the end. And this is just going to be a little measurement so I can see how much white wool I need to make. So I'm just going to place this on the mat and I'm going to start taking some small sections of white wool and I'm just going to very carefully lay them out across the mat so it's just a little bit longer than the piece of wool I've just used to measure the raccoon's body. I'm just going to keep fluffing up the fibres and layering them up. So I've got that wool all laid out. I'm just going to get my piece of wool that I used to measure the raccoon and just lay it on top so I can make sure it's the right length that I want it to be. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start felting this down to create a sheet. I don't want to felt it too much. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up one end very carefully and I'm just going to fold it in half and then I'm going to felt again so that this end is nice and smooth. This end, the other side can stay nice and wispy, but we do want one end to be nice and smooth. And I'm going to keep felting this. And every so often I'm going to very carefully lift it up from the mat. Just going very careful to not misshape the wool. And I'm going to flip it over and continue felting. So after lots and lots of felting, we can now carefully lift this from the mat, and it should help hold its shape quite well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my scissors and very, very gently trim off some of the excess fibres along the bottom. This doesn't have to be perfect, I'm just trying to neaten it up just a little bit. And now we're ready to start attaching this to the raccoon. So to add it to the raccoon, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the centre, and I'm going to place that, line it up with the centre of the body, and I'm going to place it at the bottom, like so. Then I'm going to pinch the edges just so it rises a little bit to create a little bump. And then I'm going to felt down either side. Then I'm going to continue creating little bumps, so hold it down in between each one, bump it up and felt it down. And I'm going to do this all the way around. And it's going to give it that ruffled look. Here's what it looks like so far. I've created the bumps all the way around the body. Here's what it looks like from underneath. But as you can see, there's a lot of excess up here, and all I'm going to do is felt this down into the body. And as I'm felting this down, I'm going to make sure to go in between each bump and make sure they're nice and tightly felted as well. So just going all the way around and in between each bump. And just continue felting until it's all nice and flattened out at the top and nice and secure where the bumps are. And when that's all felted down, we're now going to be working on making some little arms. So I'm just going to take some of the same white wool, and I'm just going to begin rolling it up into a triangular shape. And I'm going to start felting down and turning it over and felt again. I'm just going to keep felting and turning. You'll notice that I'm only felting one end of the arm. I'm keeping this arm nice and loose, and that's so it makes it a lot easier to attach. So just focusing on the pointed end. I'm just going to keep felting that until I'm happy with the shape. And then when you are happy with it, we can start attaching it to the raccoon. So I'm just going to position it on the body and felt that on. And of course we're going to do the same for the other arm. So both of the arms have now been attached. They're both attached at the top, whereas the bottom is nice and loose, ready so we can position them later. So next we're going to be working on the ears. For the ears we're going to be using the same colour grey as what we used for the top of the head. So I'm just going to take a nice small amount and I'm going to fluff up the fibres. I'm going to lay these down on the mat and then I'm going to felt directly down the centre. Next I'm going to felt in a diagonal angle across each side, starting at the top and working my way down. Same on the other side. And now I'm going to fold over the edges of where we've just felted and felt those down too. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue felting until this holds its shape really well. After felting a little bit I'm going to lift it up and flip it over and again continue felting. So I'm focusing on felting the top area. I'm leaving the bottom nice and loose so that it's easier to attach to the head. But I want to make sure that the top is nice and firmly felted. I'm also going to add a little bit of pink into the ears. So I'm just going to take a really small piece and I'm just going to mess up the fibres and place that again towards the top of the ear. Then I'm going to use really light pokes and just gently felt that down. I'm not over felting it, I'm just doing it really lightly just so that it holds its place. Because next we're going to very carefully lift it from the mat, flip it over and felt it down really well. And as we're felting, the grey wool is going to come through on the back side and it's going to help blend in the pink. And then when we lift this up, the pink should be nicely felted and nicely blended on the other side. So now I'm just going to take my scissors and just trim away the excess fibres and just neaten it up a lot so it's not as fuzzy everywhere. But the bottom, of course, is still nice and fluffy, so I'm going to hold it really tight at the top of the ear and pull away some of the excess at the bottom. And then this little wispy bit that's left over is what we're going to use to attach it to the head. But before we do that, I'm going to make another ear in exactly the same way. So now we've got both ears ready and they're ready for attaching. So to attach the ears, I like to place them on the head and just figure out where I want them to go. but then when it comes to attaching, I like to lay them flat towards the back first, and then I like to felt along in a line just to get them tacked down. Then what I like to do is lift them up and curve around the edges. And then just continue to felt this down so that it's really well felted. And of course, same again for the other ear. I'm going to lay it flat towards the back first, felt it down and curve the edges. Then I'm just going to keep felting these so that they're nice and secure, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next stage. So the ears are on, and we're going to be moving on to making the feet now. So just taking some of that same grey, I'm just going to fluff up the fibres. And now I'm just going to very carefully roll this up. Then I'm going to place it on the mat and just give it a few felts just so it stays in place. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to round off the top and felt down. I'm going to keep felted. Just measure it up against your raccoon to make sure you're happy with the size. But we basically want it to be long and then rounded at the top. I'm also leaving the bottom nice and loose, again so it's easier to attach. I'm going to pick it up and flip it over. More felting, again keeping it nice and rounded at the top. I'm just going to measure it up. So I am mostly happy with this size. I just want to make it a little bit smaller on the edges. So I'm just going to felt those in a little bit more. So again, just taking some grey wool and fluffing up the fibres. Then I'm going to carefully roll and then place on the mat. Going to round off the top. And then lots and lots of felting. I finished felting the other foot shape. So I'm just going to place these on and make sure that I'm happy with them. As you can tell, I'm placing them in the gaps of either side of the bump. And this is where the feet are going to sit. So I am quite happy with how they're looking. So let's move on to adding the detailing. For the details you can either use black wool or the dark grey. I'm going to be using the dark grey. So I'm just going to pull off a piece and fluff up the fibres. Then I'm going to place this on the foot. I'm not going to cover the whole foot, I want to leave a little gap at the top so that we can add the toes in. But I'm going to take a small needle and just very gently start felting this down. And I've done it all the way to the bottom of the foot, just before where the wispy end is. Using very, very light pokes for this. To add the toes, I'm just going to take some more of the same grey wool. I'm just going to roll it into a very tiny sausage and just place that on. And again, just lightly felt it down. Repeat this again for another toe. And once you're happy with how it looks and how everything's positioned, then you can go ahead and felt that down really well. Don't worry about the wool showing through on the other side, because the foot is going to be pressed up against the raccoon's body. So just make sure it's really well felted. And then repeat the same again on the other foot. So attaching the feet is easy. All we're going to do is position them. Again, we're going to position them at either side of the first bump that we created. Just like so. Then once you're happy with how they're sitting, we're just going to fold over the excess wool at the bottom and we're going to tuck it in and felt it down. And do the same on the other foot. And now we're just going to felt over the whole lower half of the foot and just make sure it's really secure. And of course do the same on the other one. Next we've got to make him a little tail. So I'm just going to take some grey wool. This is again the same as what we've used for the ears and the feet. I'm just going to fluff it up a little bit. Then I'm going to begin rolling nice and tight. Just like so. Then I'm going to felt this down. I'm just going to measure it up with the raccoon to check that I'm happy with the rough length. Then I'm going to keep felting. and twisting around. And just like before, we're going to leave one end nice and loose, but the other end we're going to felt that down. Then I'm just going to keep rotating and felting until it's nice and sturdy. And when that's felted to a point that it's nice and sturdy and holds its shape well, we're going to add some stripes to the tail. So I'm going to be using the dark grey wool again. I'm just going to pull off really small pieces and just fluff up the fibres. Then I'm just going to lay these across, just gently felting the darker wool. Then I'm going to turn it over and fold in the darker fibres around the edges. Then I'm going to repeat the same again, just taking some of the darker wool, fluffing up the fibres, placing it over the tail and felting down. I'm going to continue doing this all the way down the tail. And now that the stripes are on there, I'm just going to go back in with a smaller needle and just really felt those on. Now that the stripes are really well felted, what I'm going to do now is make the tail a little bit bushier. So I'm going to use one of my larger needles. I'm just going to very lightly scrape the surface of the wool, just so it loosens up some of the fibres and makes it look nice and fluffy. We're now going to attach the tail to the raccoon, so we're going to take the loose end of the tail and just fluffing up the fibres ready. Then I'm going to place it underneath the raccoon, but I'm going to place the tail facing forward first, felt it down, and then we're going to flip it over. So underneath the raccoon, facing forward, felt down the tail, then we're going to flip it over and felt some more. Just want that to be really nice and securely on there. Then once that's on, you can leave the tail where it is, or you can curve it round the body and felt it down. It's entirely up to you. I think I want mine to curve round just a little bit. So I'm just going to do a few little pokes just into the tail so that it attaches it to the body a bit more. and it's curved all the way around. So with the tail attached, you can now decide what you want to do with the raccoon. You can leave him as he is, which I think is adorable anyway, or you can position the arms, change him up a little bit, or if you want to, you can also do what I'm going to do, which is add a little pumpkin for him to hold. The pumpkin is nice and easy. We're just going to take some orange wool and just begin folding it. Then we're going to fold in the edges and just felt it down. Then we're going to felt in both sides just to round it off a little bit. And now what we're going to do is we're going to felt and rotate and felt and rotate, and we're just going to keep doing this to keep it nice and round. So just keep rotating, keep felting from all different angles. As you're felting, your ball will start to become more compressed and firm up a bit. Just remember to keep rotating it and felting to keep it nice and rounded. It doesn't have to be perfectly round because pumpkins aren't perfectly round, but just keep rotating it anyway and get it as round as you can. And then once you're happy with the shape, you can see this one's still quite spongy, which is exactly what we're aiming for. Because now I'm going to take a larger needle. This one is a 38 gauge, and I'm just going to felt directly down the centre, just in one straight line. And just like so. Then I'm going to use the same needle and felt again down one side. And this is going to create the segments of the pumpkin. And again on the other side. Same needle, just felting down. And of course you can go all the way around if you want to, but because mine is going to be pressed up against the raccoon, I'm going to leave the back just as it is because you're not going to see it anyway. But I'm going to keep going over those lines and make sure they're nice and defined. The pumpkin may start to lose its rounded shape a little bit, especially if you are only doing the segments at the front, but this is perfectly okay as long as it looks like a pumpkin from the front. I'm just going over it with the needle and just shaping it where I feel like it needs it a little bit more. And now to really define those lines, I'm going to take some darker orange and I'm going to pull off some really thin strips and just twist that nice and tight. Then I'm going to place it over one of the segments and felt it in. This is just going to make those lines really stand out. So I'm going to do the same again for the other one. Just take a really thin piece, roll it nice and tight, place it over one of the lines and felt it in. So they are now nice and defined. So here's what it looks like from the front and from the back. Of course I haven't done any segments on the back, hence why it looks like this. But as I said before, you can do them all the way around if you prefer. So next we're going to add a little stalk. So I'm going to take a tiny bit of brown wool and I'm just going to roll that up into a very tiny sausage. Then I'm just going to felt this on the mat, just enough so that it holds its shape. Then I'm going to felt it on top of the pumpkin. Just like so. And now we're going to be attaching it to the raccoon. So I'm just going to position it on the raccoon where I want it to sit. Then I'm going to felt in the back side of the pumpkin. This doesn't have to be perfectly neat, but I'm just felting it from the top and then from the bottom. Then I'm going to position the hands to hold the pumpkin. Then I'm going to felt the hands in place. If you don't feel like it's secure enough, then you can use glue and glue the pumpkin on, but usually felting is more than enough to keep it in place. So here is the finished raccoon. I'm so pleased with how he came out and I think he's adorable. I really hope you enjoyed watching the video, and of course if you make